I have a Kohler Courage 22 horsepower. Suddenly one cylinder stopped firing. Replace the coil and that cylinder still won't fire.
Hello, and thank you for choosing JustAnswer. I'll be helping you today and am committed to providing clear and concise answers to your question. There is a small ground wire going to the coil. If you disconnect it and try it, does that cylinder fire? You may need to kill it by pulling the plug wires unless it has a fuel shutoff solenoid. Site guidelines require that I post all troubleshooting steps or partial answers as answers, but this is certainly not the final answer yet. Additional troubleshooting will be required. So please hold off on rating until we determine the exact problem. Please use the reply to expert link so we can continue the discussion.
I unplugged the ground wire to the solenoid and the cylinder still didn't fire. How do I determine if the motor has a solenoid shutdown?
If you see a single or double wire going to the carburetor, it has one. It would lock similar to this. How are you testing for spark on that cylinder? Does the engine die if you pull the other plug wire? Have you swapped the coils out from side to see if the problem travels? Have you cleaned the connection points where the coil and engine meet with a bit of sandpaper, both the coil and the engine? What is the air gap set to?
I have swapped coils, problem remains the same. I have cleaned contact points with sandpaper. I set the air gap just enough that the engine wouldn't drag upon starting, not best I'm sure. When plug wire on other cylinder is removed, engine dies, and yes, there is a fuel solenoid shutdown.
Air gap should be set at 0.012 inches, actually 0.011 minus 0.013, so I always shoot for the middle. How are you testing that cylinder for spark? If it were the coil, it would travel, so are you sure it's a spark problem and not a valve issue or other?
Just a simple spark tester and visual, holding the plug wire while engine running. I wasn't inclined to a valve problem as the cylinder shutdown was sudden. Nothing progressive missing, etc. Just stopped.
So to recap, with a known good coil from the opposite side that is firing, when swapped to the other side, gapped properly, ground wire completely disconnected, it doesn't fire. Have you done this test as well? Start up the engine and pull off one of the spark plug wires using a pair of insulated piers to prevent getting an unpleasant shock. Does the engine run differently? Engine runs much worse than it did. Both cylinders working, engine runs the same. Cylinder you remove the plug wire from isn't working, engine dies. The other cylinder isn't working.
Yes, yes and yes. The one cylinder is not running, no fire. Follow the procedure you suggested with removing the ground, same thing. When the wire on the cylinder nor firing is removed, no change in engine. This I know, no fire to one cylinder. What's causing it? I don't know.
I'm either missing something here, or something is really not adding up. The engine dies if you pull the wire from the known good cylinder, wire still connected to the bad cylinder, while running, is that correct? What I'm getting at is there's only so many factors in the ignition system. If you have a known good coil on one side that's being swapped out and it still doesn't work, that points to something other than the ignition, assuming a good connection to the block, no unintentional grounding such as through a bad ground wire, or a bad plug. That's why I'm trying to make sure it indeed does die when you pull the good wire, not the bad. Because if it's behaving the way I'm understanding at this point, it would defy any logical sequence of events.
I understand, that's why I'm talking to you, Engine dies if I pull plug wire from good side. Plugs have been changed, both brand new, new coil, and I've swapped out the new coil with the older one on the good cylinder and it still does the same thing. The only thing I will try next is making sure I have a proper ground. It could be corroded or broken wire. With the fuel solenoid shut down, just one cylinder.
On the wire, make sure it's removed for testing. The coil itself needs to be well grounded to the block, but the wire prevents spark rather than allowing it. If the wire is damaged and touching the block somewhere along the path, it will stop the spark by grounding out the primary winding of the coil. That's the usual reason in this type of situation, which is why we suggest removing it completely for testing purposes. The fuel solenoid would shut down both since it would prevent fuel to both cylinders, but it would not affect the spark, only the fuel supply.
I now have fire on both cylinders, but the cylinder is not running.
If you pull off the rocker box cover, are both valves opening and closing properly? Any evidence of sticking or a rocker arm or push rod that's become disconnected?
If you have a home improvement or appliance question and want to chat with an expert, now visit justanswer.com/ythi.